everybody, and welcome to the second installment in my series on long wheelbase Luxo barges. Today we are looking at the cheapest in the series, my 1999 Mercedes-Benz S500L. Although these can be picked up for next to nothing, there is an awful lot about them which I really do love and makes you question why you would ever need to spend anything more. Although this vehicle is now 2 decades old, it has a features list which is rather impressive even through the lens of 2020. For example, it has 4-corner air ride suspension which you can raise or set in sport mode. I don't think actually lowers it, but does make it a little firmer, makes the handling a little sportier. It has soft closed doors all round and a boot. Up front you have heated and ventilated seats. They're not cooled, they're just ventilated, but it is still nice and it does still make a difference. You have 4-zone climate control, you have a sunroof, you have double glazing, and you do have some old school tech which unfortunately no longer works, including the CD changer and the television. But crucially, this car does one thing very right. It relaxes you. This is the sort of car that I could do an entire drive in without ever putting my foot more than about a quarter of the way down, and I would be very happy indeed. And that's one reason actually that I bought this car. You see, before this I had a Saab, a very modified Saab that seemed like a good idea at the time and eventually just began to annoy me. I bought said Saab because I wanted something cool but also slightly economical, and what I found with that particular car, because it was a tuned turbo diesel, that it never really did what you told it to. This car is the opposite. Yes, it has a 5-speed automatic gearbox which you can't really control. There are no buttons to override it. The next best thing you've got is to be able to set it in the maximum highest gear, so you can tell it to not go beyond third, for example. But that's just not a problem in an S-Class. It shifts smoothly and nicely, and that engine has plenty of pull from very low down. Compared with my V12 BMW, this car is a relative flyweight. It's 1,800 kilos, give or take. That's about 300 kilos less than the BMW with its great big V12. And that means that the 306 horsepower and 340 pound-feet of torque in this actually do a fairly decent job. I don't even know what the 0 to 60 time is in this car, and to be perfectly honest, it is not very important. The steering's actually not that bad. Now, of course, it's not very fast or particularly direct, but it impresses more than I think that it might. I found this also with the Jaguar XJ that I reviewed last year. Some of these air ride systems actually can be quite entertaining to drive. Don't go into it expecting real driver feel and involvement, but the way you can throw this thing down a road really beggars belief, because it shouldn't be able to do some of the things that it can. Now, the ownership experience of this car hasn't been particularly smooth. I bought it, like I said, to replace the Saab, which I unfortunately lost loads of money on. And I had hoped that this one, having had a decent service history and everything else, might be good. And on first impressions, it was. These cars are notorious for rust, and this one has only a little bit of it, and it's pretty much all superficial, so that was fine. Crucially, my friend Darren and I, who I brought with me to check it over, looked at all of the electronics in it, and pretty much everything, barring the aforementioned CD changer and TV, works in here. The seats are extremely comfortable. They have loads of adjustment in them. I love the headrest here, that's great. Also little details too, like the sunroof, which you can pop open and slide back, but the cover on it has a few little slats in it, so you can have the roof open but with the cover shut, so you're not getting blinded if the sun happens to be up there, which obviously being winter is not going to, and it'll still let a little bit of air in. So that really is lovely. For visiting friends who live down little narrow country lanes with big humps in the middle of the road, dead animals, rocks, twigs and such like, being able to raise the suspension at will is very nice indeed. You can also do that in the Audi on test, but for some reason Audi have buried that option deep within a menu, so you've got to press about 4 different things on the touchscreen, whereas in here, click a button, done. That is smart. I love the dash in this thing. Very clean, very easy to read. Actually feels quite slick, quite modern. It has some little displays in there which look a little bit out of date, but honestly, it's fine. I actually prefer this in many ways over the car which replaced it, which has a single LCD in the middle that I think is actually dated a bit worse than this. Now, if you didn't want the 5-litre V8 with the S-Class of this generation, you have options above and below. Below, you had a range of V6s in both petrol and diesel, and I think you may have even had a straight 6 diesel to begin with as well. This is a fairly early car, the model living on a good sort of 4 or 5 years after this. Above this, you had options like the S600 with the V12, and those were all long wheelbase, I believe. And you also had the S55 AMG and the S65. The 65 eventually coming with a bi-turbo V12 producing a lot of power. You can pick these cars up insanely cheaply. I was actually offered a V6 at just over £1,000, although I decided for petrol head reasons to go with the V8, and that's a decision I don't particularly regret. Let's just listen to it for a second, shall we? Now there's the speed limit. It's a dignified sound, it really is. This has some K&N air filter elements in it, not full cone filters. I don't know whether that's responsible for the sound or whether it would just be like this all the time. This is, barring the alloy wheels on the outside, a totally standard car. It's glorious. It pulls from low down, but as with most naturally aspirated engines like this, it does do its best work at higher revs, and if you're really on it, the gearbox eventually gets the idea and will hold the revs for you, but honestly, if you're just making brisk, reasonable progress, it's absolutely fine. Of the trio this week, this is definitely the least exciting, least dynamic car, but also it does set the benchmark in terms of ride, comfort and quality. Even on those 19s, it's still pretty damn comfy. Back to prices. You can pick one of these up for about £1,000, but generally speaking, they're going to need a lot of work. The top end of the market is probably about £10,000, and that'll be an S600 or an S65 with a very high spec, low miles, and in great condition. This one is going to be going up for sale shortly after this video. I'm going to make a separate video on that and a little bit of a walk around for it. And realistically, because I'm going to put it up at an auction, I expect to get between about £2,000 and £3,000 for it. I'm hoping obviously at the higher end of that, but someone is going to get a bargain on this because I have spent a fair bit of money on it. What have I had to do? Well, I've done a full service on it because although the previous owner has maintained it and maintained it well, quite a few things were due. And I decided to go a bit above and beyond, and I did pretty much everything, including these spark plugs. That's expensive because this is a twin spark setup, which means there are 16 of them. And it's actually the same in the V12, so if you got one of those, you're going to have to shell out for 24 plugs. I also replaced the engine mounts, which are known to go in this, along with the gearbox mount, because you may as well do it at the same time. That's not a cheap job either, but it does make the car a lot better, a lot smoother, and it handles better because of it. Again, another thing that sort of goes quite commonly, there are plenty of buyer's guides on these cars. Just look up W220 buyer's guide and you'll find out everything you need to know. This is very comfortable. It's a very pleasant thing to ride around in, and if you wanted to bring it up to date, there's a couple of different ways you could do it. The cheapest and easiest way to do that would be to buy a little attachment for about £200, like a little parrot style thing, and that'll just clip in the interior here somewhere. That'll give you DAB, Bluetooth, and that, to be honest, is really all that I need above and beyond what this car already has. I use my phone for sat-nav, so as long as it can talk to me, that's absolutely fine. You could replace all of this stuff in here, and there are lots of ways of doing that, but honestly, you're going to be spending money that I just don't think is worth doing on a car of this value. I did also have some issues with the air ride system, you know, the one that everybody warns you about. I came out one day to find that my Mercedes had decided it wanted to be a lowrider. Now, there's a few different things in this car that can fail. The struts themselves can start leaking, but generally you'll hear that. They'll actually hiss, and you'll find that it's gone down on one corner. The pump can also fail, especially if you have a leak, because it's then working overtime to keep filling up a leaking airbag, and basically that is expensive. Or at least I thought it was. I mean, it wasn't my pump that failed, but I did look up the cost of a replacement pump, and it isn't hideous. There are lots of them available, including refurbished ones, aftermarket ones, all that sort of stuff. The problem I had was a leaking valve block. The valve block is the piece that basically diverts the air to the corners of the suspension as they request it. Now, I was fully braced for that to be hideously expensive, but it turned out to be a part that cost only a couple of £100, and that was for a genuine Mercedes item, and fitment wasn't very much either. When I got this car, I had all these plans of putting a sexy exhaust on it and making it sound all crazy and silly, but to be perfectly honest with you, as soon as I'd driven it around for just a couple of 100 miles, I thought doing that would just really ruin what this car is all about. It makes enough noise when I want it to, and then none the rest of the time, and that is absolutely right. So, running costs. The service wasn't actually hideously expensive, even considering all the things I had done, which included stuff like aligning the picnic tables in the back. I spent in total about £1,500–1,600, and that includes a lot of stuff, some fresher tyres, or all these sorts of stuff. But feeding the car is actually alright, it's not good. I'm not going to lie. I'm averaging at the moment about 18 to the gallon. Now, normally you'd see a bit better than that, or a bit worse if you are in town. I would expect a lifetime average in this car of sort of between 20 to 24, depending on what kind of usage you have for the car. Now, on longer runs, I'll see about 27 to 28 to the gallon. That really is on just motorway, 65, 70 mile an hour cruising, which this car really excels at. Even on a road like this, I'm doing about 10 mile an hour shy of the speed limit because it just is happy there. And that's what I absolutely love about this car. With the Saab, every time I put my foot down, there was a committee meeting held about what the turbo wanted to do, what the gearbox wanted to do, what the engine wanted to do. But with this, it's great. I just put my foot down gently, the car just makes progress, no fuss, no bother. If I put my foot down hard, it'll put itself into the right gear, and I was kind of worried about this only having the 5 ratios to choose from, but in actual fact, it's spot on. Even at motorway speed, 70 mile an hour, so it's doing about 2,000 RPM. This is geared differently to the V6. It's one of the reasons that I went with the V8. I just wanted to rev that a little bit lower. In fairness, I'm not sure I'd actually have been saving that much fuel if I went with the V6 either. And with a car like this, well, you got to go with the V8 at least, right? It helps too that that engine is notoriously reliable, and this one, having only 85,000 miles on it over 21 years, I don't think has been really that stressed. I am deeply upset that somebody in London decided to drive into it and then drive off the other day, and that has annoyed me greatly, and is one of the reasons that I want it sold, because that's just annoying me. Unfortunately, the main reason that I need to sell it is that I simply don't have room on my driveway anymore. I've run out, and cars like this, because they're so big, just take up too much room. One of the few downsides with this car is the boot. You would think that a car that has so much interior space, I mean that there is loads of legroom back there, would have a generous boot, but it really doesn't, and that is a theme that is sort of repeated throughout this series. If you are looking for a car which has the ultimate in load capacity, you're still better off with something like an E-Class Estate. The W220 is unlikely to be an S-Class that is ever loved. However, they are so stupendously cheap. If you buy wisely, you should get at least a few years good motoring out of one. Even if you buy one that's, say, £1,000 with a fresh MOT, it's going to be the nicest cheap rental car you've ever had. And if at the end of that year it's unfortunately only fit for the scrapyard, then, well, do it. It's probably also good for the environment too, because, well, using an old car is generally better than having a new one built, so you could nearly call it green, but I wouldn't probably say that to anyone that owns an electric car, because they may get a bit upset. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and you'll join me for the other installments in this look at long wheelbase luxury barges. The Mercedes has certainly set the bar very high, and when you consider the cost of entry, well, the BM and Audi really have their work cut out for them. See you on the next one. Bye bye.